everybody, and welcome to what I am sure is going to be another exciting episode of Office Hours. My name is Adam Coble. I'm a tabletop game master. I play role-playing games. Maybe you've heard me before. Maybe you've played some Dungeon World yourself. I had someone tell me the other day. I got a message on Twitter. Somebody said to me, every time I introduce Dungeon World to a new group, inevitably someone says, this is the Dungeons and Dragons that I always wanted to be playing. And I'm like, thank God for you. So if you're out there playing RPGs, if you're playing Dungeon World especially, thank you. If you're not playing Dungeon World, I don't know. I hope you're playing something you like. That's something that I want for every person who is playing role-playing games. This episode is dedicated to you, the game master who is playing the game they don't really want to be playing because that's what everybody else wants to play. This episode is dedicated to all the players who are playing just because they want to hang out with their friends. And you know what? Your friends want to play the game you don't want to play. I appreciate you for trying. I think it's real. That's very real. I have been and continue to be that person from time to time. So, you know what? I hope you can end up in a place where you end up playing the game you want to play. But if you're not, I hope you're having fun. If you can't be with the game you love, I guess love the one you're playing if you can manage it. So it's fall, or it will be very soon. It's going to be fall soon, which means kids are going back to school on college campuses all across the world. I presume people are starting up brand new role-playing game campaigns. I never played any tabletop RPGs when I was in college for the brief period of time that I went to university. I was very busy with work and doing college things for like a year, like studying and what have you. But I know that that's where a lot of people kind of got their first start. And I don't know if that's going to be true for very long. I think that how did you get into playing role-playing games as a thing is shifting pretty hard. I think that more and more people are finding out about RPGs through totally different venues. They're not really just the like, I stumbled into the D&D club at my university anymore, which is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. I've really enjoyed being able to watch kind of the way that people see role-playing games shift, even in my lifetime. Like when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, it was still Satan's game. And in my heart of hearts, in this shriveled black lump of darkness that I carry around with me in my rib cage, Dungeons and Dragons will always be Satan's game, but I don't think that's true for most people anymore. I think most people come to D&D and they're like, this is that fun thing that the voice actors that are in everything that they do. This is that fun thing that those esports people that I like do. It's pretty cool watching these things, watching these shift. But I, for one, would like to keep Satan in role-playing games. It's part of my agenda, the satanic agenda. So I guess this episode is dedicated to our Dark Lord Satan and also GMs out there everywhere. So if you've never watched an episode of Office Hours before, if you're watching this and you're like, well, who is this rambling man and what is he doing? Well, thank you for coming. You can submit questions to me through my website, www.adam-coble.com. If you go to that website, there is a link that says Office Hours on it. You just click it and you can fill out there's a form. And then I'll get your questions. And then every time we do an episode of Office Hours, I answer 3 questions and we talk about role-playing games. And honestly, it's as much about just bringing up the topic so that we can all kind of chat about it as it is answering the specific question. Though today, our second question comes from somebody who has a very, very specific question. And I love these. It's about a specific game set in a specific place. And I think it's really cool. So today we're going to talk about community. We're going to talk about complexity in games. And we're going to talk a little bit about game design and reward and advancement at the end. So lots and lots of good stuff to talk about today. And we're going to begin with a question about playing it safe.
Hi, Adam. I recently started a meetup group for queer people in my city to play tabletop RPGs together. Right now we're planning one-off events, but we'll probably have some longer campaigns too. With over 30 strangers signed up in just a couple days, I want to make sure the group starts off right in some key ways. One of my biggest concerns is the safety of play at group events. I want to, as much as possible, encourage emotionally safe and consent-focused play. And knowing that shit happens, I also want to have good processes for addressing the issues that do come up. I'm also thinking about how my role in the game, as GM or otherwise, might conflict with the power dynamics of my role as group organizer, as well as how to handle events where I might not be present at all. So my questions for you are, how do I set guidelines for safe play and infuse them into the organization as a whole? How should we as a group respond to issues, especially ones raised after the fact? How do I uphold these guidelines when playing in a non-GM role without appearing to backseat GM or claim more authority than other players? And how do I manage these concerns in events or campaigns that I don't personally attend? Love office hours and Hot for Teacher. Thanks for all the good content.
So this is a great question. Andy's got their shit together. I love the idea of just even thinking about this stuff and kind of how do we come at it. Andy, I think that you're an honor to answer this question. Thank you so much for doing this work. So how do you do it better? How do we figure out ways to, there's a lot to this question. So we're going to take a little bit of time to kind of dig into it. And I think that there's a lot, and Andy, you should be asking this question, not only of me, but of other kinds of community organizers, right? Like reach out to other queer community organizations around you and ask them how they manage safety in their groups, right? Because it's not just about tabletop role-playing games, though certainly as a creative and somewhat vulnerable endeavor, role-playing games do require safety discussions and safety tools in place. But this isn't just about that. It's about community, right? It's about understanding what will keep your community safe. And you can get help with that, not just from other tabletop people, but from other like queer folks, other community organizers. So if you can, and it sounds like this, you sound pretty well educated on this topic, Andy, and that's very heartening. I imagine that there are probably people that you can use as resources, either through like a shared queer community space. We have one in Vancouver, or through other community events based on what other stuff you've got kind of going on. So reach out to other people, ask about that. I think that we'll talk a little bit about kind of building these safety protocols. And I think that I chose this question in part because this is a timely question. So the recording of this episode is on Tuesday, the 17th of September, the live recording. And this week, Monty Cook Games put out a free PDF about consent in role-playing games, like how to build good consent at the table. And it's interesting, and by interesting, I mean kind of like frustrating and difficult, the way that some people have been responding to it. There was a lot of negative pushback. There was a lot of people saying, if somebody brought this to my table, I would laugh them out of the room. Or if somebody asked me to talk about consent with them, I would be very uncomfortable and I would feel like I am being censored. You can imagine that the kind of people that are having this reaction are the sort of people who are used to not having to think about other people's mental health and well-being, right? These are folks who, and I think this is why when you look at groups of role-playing game players that contain people who in their day-to-day life experience marginalization, when you're looking at people of color, you're looking at disabled folks, you're looking at queer people, there is a much greater drive to create a space in which they can creatively engage without feeling at risk. And that makes sense, right? Because people who experience marginalization in their day-to-day life don't want to risk experiencing that at the table. And I think that a lot of the time when people say like, I don't need this, my group wouldn't need this is dumb, there is a defensiveness there. There's a fear that like, oh, maybe we're doing it wrong, or maybe somebody is trying to tell me what I can and can't say. And that defensiveness comes from a place where I think that a lot of these groups that don't feel like they need safety tools don't realize that the reason they don't need them is because the kinds of people that they are generally playing with don't think about this stuff, right? The idea of a group of people who don't need safety tools for their role-playing games, it's not unheard of, right? For example, the Roll20 Presents and Roll20 and role play groups that I play with, all 4 of my campaigns right now, we have no formal safety tools in place for our games. We don't use the X card. We don't have lines and veils. We haven't explicitly sat down to use a tool for these things. But when I do one shots, I often offer that up as an option, right? I'll talk about it. And the reason why the Roll20 Presents and the roleplay groups don't really need it is because I'm playing with the same people fairly regularly. And we make a point of having just a brief conversation about like, hey, we're trying to create a fun, interesting environment. We're trying to create a show people want to watch, and people being uncomfortable is not good for them, for their mental health, or for the show at large. So if you feel weird about something, like bring it up, right? And I think that it's worth bringing up no matter what, right? The groups that don't think that this is necessary, the groups that think we don't need to talk about safety at the table, maybe they don't, right? Maybe they are not at risk of endangering each other. Maybe there's no risk at the table of that happening. Maybe they know each other so well and have been playing together for so long, and probably because I think that generally, if you don't actively think about encouraging inclusivity in your groups, you end up with sort of monocultural groups where people mostly have culture in common. They may be operating off of the same basic guidelines, right? If you sit down with a group of people who look and talk and probably think like you, the chances that you're going to say something that violates your own mental health and well-being are much lower, right? You all kind of assume a shared cultural environment, but I don't think that that's fair, and certainly not in Andy's case. I don't think it's fair to do without talking about it first, without just bringing it up. Now, I'm not going to go into every single safe play environment tool that you can use. There are a lot of them. They all serve different games. You're going to want to be thinking about the games themselves, but there are some general tools. I think reading and learning about consent practice in general, and this might be something that, again, your local sort of queer community will probably be thinking and talking about already, right? Look into that stuff. Look into if there's a consent group, a better consent group around that you can kind of like learn from. But from a game design perspective, keep in mind that even something as unobtrusive as the X card does change the flow of play, right? Let me give you a basic example. If you as a dungeon master didn't ask or know in advance that somebody in your group has arachnophobia, and you've created an adventure about the drow and spiders and giant spiders and driders and spider swarms, and there's lots of fun stuff you've planned in there, and you sit down at the table and you start playing, and as soon as the giant spiders come out, someone says, I've got arachnophobia, I can't engage in this, then the game comes to a halt, which is why I think that it's important to get to know players in advance and talk about this stuff, and also be aware that if you can X card something to remove it from the game, it will change the flow. It's not by any means a bad thing, but something that you need to keep in mind, right? Something to think about. And I like having these conversations on the regular. I play a lot of campaign games and not a lot of one-shots. And so for me, building up safety takes place over a long period of time, right? I build that slowly with people. I know what Dave and Elf and Lauren and Blue Jay are comfortable or uncomfortable with, right? So I don't want to do those things. And I know already in my mind, I know where to draw that line because we've been playing together. But if you're not playing with people you know, or if you're trying to create an environment where there is safety in play, the way we do this is by creating protocols, creating rules. And there's some really interesting analogies here, some really interesting comparisons between building safety tools for a group, right? And creating rules for a tabletop role-playing game, right? Because as a role-playing game designer, you make rules and you put them out into the world, and eventually people will play that game without ever talking to you, interacting with you, or letting you see what they're doing, and they might be doing it wrong, right? All you can do is create the protocols. So in this case, and I think Andy did a great job sort of honing in on this. You can create the rules, but that's not all, right? When you make a rule for people to follow, it can be really easy as a community organizer to say, look, I made the rules. Now everyone will follow them, right? That's how it works. Like, welcome to the game club. You have to do these things. You can't do those things. And just no one will break the rules. That'll never happen, right? But obviously that's incredibly short-sighted, and it's as useful. And this is something that you will have an opportunity to influence in a way that a game designer wouldn't. You can say what happens if those rules are broken, if those protocols are broken, right? If you say respect the X card and someone in your group reports to you after a game that their GM just barreled through an X card, what is your protocol for responding to that, right? And it is so much more after the fact. Now, you want to have somebody present at every meeting, whether it's you or some kind of deputized safety officer, someone who is trained in these protocols, who knows how to help people when this comes up, so that if in the middle of a game, somebody says to you or to one of your deputies, like, hey, we're having an X card problem, we're having a safety issue at the table, can you help us, right? Building that support. Because I think it's irresponsible to create rules, throw them out into the world, and then leave, right? Now, this doesn't mean that you have to manage this yourself, but I would say that get people on board, understand who's going to be your stakeholders in this, who's going to care about this as much as you are. Hopefully everybody, but we develop when we go out to build a community space, we don't do it alone, right? Like, I didn't build the math squad by myself. I had my moderators to help me, and still do, right? And they're there to uphold the guidelines of the channel, of our Discord. They're there to set a good example. My mods are there to make us all better, right? They're there to assist the community in being what it can be. So find your moderators, find the people who can be there every session, who can be called upon when there's trouble, and that you trust. And that's the most important thing, because as the organizer, you have this sort of politician problem where you both want to build this community to serve your agenda for the community, right? You have this plan for a queer space where people can safely play tabletop role-playing games, and you have a vision to get you there, right? So in a way, the rules serve your vision. They are creating a space in which you are getting what you set out to get, right? But you're also responsible for fulfilling that. In a way, you both lead and serve, right? Because you're there to make sure that everybody has a good time, and you're there to exemplify good behavior. So I think this kind of overlaps with the question about upholding the guidelines. I'm not sure the best way to respond to safety issues, right? Like, who is or isn't allowed to play in your groups? What kind of behavior is and isn't acceptable? What kind of things get a slap on the wrist versus an expulsion, right? This is, do you time people out or do you ban them, right? And these things will come from talking with other community organizers, understanding what other people have done in communities, and finding the tools and the protocols that work best for you. Set aside the fact that this is a tabletop role-playing game thing. This could be a discussion group. This could be a cooking class. It could be anything, right? The rules and the protocols that you are designing could theoretically be applied to any specific environment, right? It doesn't have to just be tabletop RPGs. And then you can start thinking about the ways that RPGs affect this stuff. And that's when you can start talking about the X card and whatever, because the X card and lines and veils, all of these tools that we have before us to make these environments safer, the purpose to serve is everybody's safety. And when people are safe, when people are comfortable, they can create. Like, we need that platform, right? We need that space to be safe so that we can be creative. And that, I think, is so important, right? That's why we want to create those environments, right? So how you uphold them, I think the idea there is that you uphold them by setting a good example, finding other people in the group who are with you and who agree and who are bought into the mission, and they will also set a good example. And I think what we really, really need to do, and I've been talking about this since episode number 1, what we really need to do as a culture is take all the safety stuff, all the interpersonal stuff, all of that bullshit, and just sever it from the player GM role, right? The GM is not responsible for safety at the table. The GM is not responsible for safety at the table, right? Everyone is. So making this a community responsibility, not a GM responsibility, helps everyone keep everyone else accountable, right? Just because the GM has a certain kind of authority at the table in certain types of games doesn't mean they're responsible for all of the safety at the table, right? It's a group environment. And this is the thing, right? Like the GM fulfills a role, right? Just like the bass player in a band. The GM does their job just like the bass player does, but they're part of a larger group with a vocalist and a guitarist and a drummer. And you need a bunch of different people to make a band in the same way that the GM and the players all need to work together to make this thing work, right? So try to break down those things. And I think that to kind of get at Andy's last question, right? How do I manage these concerns in events or campaigns I don't personally attend? Make this mission something that everyone who participates buys into, right? Because if you go all lawful neutral about it and you say, these are the laws, I have etched them in stone upon the wall, these are the laws, if you violate the laws, get out, right? This is my commandment on high from Andy. Andy says, do these things or you are fired, right? And nobody buys in, right? If nobody else wants to do that, all they're going to see is a list of things they're not allowed to do, right? You need to get them to buy in to your mission, to be here in your space because they value the same things that you value. And I think that you can do that, again, by setting a good example, showing people that this does make games better, right? Just do it good, Andy. Do it good. Because if you set a good example, if you pull forward the idea that safety creates comfort allows people to be creative. Creativity is what makes games fun. So work together to make this a community process. Get everyone to buy in. And this is a place where your GM stuff and your community organizer stuff is going to overlap because you have that skill already, right, Andy? That skill of getting people to buy into your creative vision, right? You're coming to the table with an idea. And the idea is that a community of people who care about each other's safety can create a better, more fun time playing role-playing games. Get them to buy in on that. Get them to own it and to be a part of it. And then the community will functionally police itself. And that's the hope, right? And you and your people, the people you trust, your council, they're here to help you in that, right? You're not necessarily the be all and end all of all decisions, right? Look at the community as serving itself. And honestly, the more you do this, the more you just play these games, the more you show them off, the more you become comfortable showing people why they need safety tools in games, the more they're going to buy in and the more that it's going to self-reinforce, right? It takes time. Having a process in place to say, if there is a problem, if there is a grievance, if somebody comes and says that something bad has happened, what do we do? I can't tell you what to do because that's part of your vision, right? I don't know how aggressive you want to be. I don't know the people you are serving in this case, right? I don't know your community, but look at the community and find out what that community needs to be safe and then be a good example of that, right? Step forward with that and show everyone this is how we do it, right? Now I'm going to have that song stuck in my head for the whole rest of the day. So it's tough, right? Obviously it's a big undertaking. Sit down with your group, figure out a way that you can give them the elevator pitch for this stuff. Talk about why you're doing it, right? Show them your passion. Do not just be like, these are the rules and I'm the consent cop. And if you don't do it, I'm going to kick you out. Explain to people why this stuff matters. Get them to connect with it. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm told what I can and can't do, some little part of me, makes me irritated. But if I'm told this is why things are the way they are here, it's much easier for me to buy in. So if you just tell people, hey, so we want this to be a safe space. Here's how we do that. And I think that you're doing good work, Andy. We are in a hobby that hasn't really fully embraced consent yet. obviously, as you can see with the reaction to this Monty Cook book that's just come out. It's a slow process, but this is the great thing about community is that it's made up of smaller groups, right? And for you, you've got your 30 or so people to take care of, and I believe you. I believe you can do it. It's not as difficult as it looks, but if you get people to buy in, you can share that labor and not do it all yourself. Yeah. So I don't know. Good luck. Good luck, Andy. I'm excited. That group sounds like it would have been so fun if I had time to meet new people and play role-playing games. I would attend your group, Andy. So we have a very specific question. We have our second question, very, very specific question about Chronicles of Darkness and the city of Atlanta. But I think there's some interesting metaphors here, so we're going to talk about this one.
Hello, Adam. Tristan G33K here. I've been binging Office Hours for a couple of months to get caught up, and now that I'm nearing the most recent episode, I'm excited to finally ask a question of my own. I'm currently running a Chronicles of Darkness game set in modern-day Atlanta. Specifically, this is a Demon the Descent game, where the PCs are fallen cybernetic angels, bargaining for pieces of other people's lives to hide within, all while trying to uncover and disrupt the pieces and plans of the God Machine. Being a fan of the city myself, I really wanted to bring the city to life, almost as if it's its own character. Furthermore, in the God Machine canon, the literal infrastructure of the city, highways, trains, postal services, sanitation systems, and so on, they all serve as the pulsing veins of the godlike entity who is the PC's greatest threat. This is a difficult proposition because, as I look into it, I find that modern cities are horrifically complicated. Everything you do, whether it's connected to Wi-Fi, flushing a toilet, taking an ambulance ride that you can't afford to the hospital, all of these actions rely on layers and layers of infrastructure which, whether they've been suborned by the God Machine in this instance or not, could be manipulated in this game of subtle action, cosmic espionage, and risky, profane heists. What advice do you have for simulating a complex setting like this in a meaningful, mechanical way, while showing off unique quirks of the setting and making the city and its districts feel like they have a personality of their own? How many layers or nodes of interaction should a tabletop simulation like this have? And will it succeed in creating the kind of mood that I want? Thank you.
Hyper-specific question. Extremely, supremely hyper-specific question. But what I think is interesting here, Tristan is staring down the barrel of a gun that seems like it's bigger than it actually is. So first of all, Tristan, part of the reason why I grabbed this question is because it sounds like the God Machine is like capitalism, where it's like you may not like it. In fact, it may be the PC's greatest threat, but it is around you all the time, right? Everything that you do is at some level, if you follow the line far enough, it is a bad deal, right? Every meal you eat, every Wi-Fi network you connect to, every time you leave your house, you are participating in a system that you are fighting, right? A system that you're competing against. And I think, honestly, Tristan, that's the point of some of this stuff, right? Like that's the idea. You are trying to live within the arms of the God Machine. Now, the thing is, you're right. Like it is a difficult proposition because you have to balance tension between existing and engaging with the game, right? Between looking at every single possible thing in PC paranoia glasses, right? Because this is a thing that PCs will do. The first time you show them that the infrastructure of Atlanta is a trap, that there is danger in everything they do, they will become paranoid. And they will immediately want to get away from anything that might hurt or threaten them, right? players of role-playing games will go well out of their way, unless they're playing a game where self-destruction is specifically an incentivized process in the game to avoid harm, avoid danger. They will try to go to any lengths, right? So there is, I think, some session zeroing to be done with your players to set expectation, right? To say to them, the purpose of the game is to explore the city and to learn what is or isn't, as you said, suborned by the God machine, right? What aspects, what things can we still cling to in this dystopian hellscape that may yet belong to us, right? What can be saved? And this is the thing, and I think this is really interesting, is that you're coming at it, Tristan, looking for simulating a complex setting in a meaningful mechanical way, right? Looking for layers or nodes of tabletop simulation. My approach to that, and obviously Chronicles of Darkness, Demon the Descent will give you, fingers crossed, they will give you tools for doing this. But my thought is take all that simulationist priority and fucking huck it out the window. Because if you're trying to do a simulationist play, it's very much going to be about like tiny details, right? Making it feel real. And that real feeling is going to engage the player's paranoia very, very quickly. Yeah, it's tough. You really only get one gotcha. And so I think what you should do is talk about how a big theme of your game is going to be, what can we hold on to in a world where everything is corrupted by the God machine, right? Our enemy owns everything and we have next to nothing. And that kind of play, right? Like, what can we snatch back from the jaws of doom? That kind of play is really fun. That idea of like, we can only truly trust one another. We need to find safety in a world that hates us, right? Populated by our uncaring, unceasing God machine enemy. That's good play. But you have to talk to the players about there's no running away from the God machine. This is not a game where you can bail out, leave Atlanta, and go live in the woods, right? That's not what this game is about. This is a game about the city. And if your players buy into that, they're going to make characters that are going to have reasons to stick around. They are going to bend their characters' priorities to fit the game rather than say to you, fuck you, I do what I want. You got to make the campaign follow me around. There is some back and forth here that needs to happen. And it sounds to me like, knowing what I know about Chronicles of Darkness and about all of these games in general, they tend to want you to look at things not in terms of city blocks and specific directions, but they want you to think in terms of vibe, of feeling, of scenes, of moments, right? So it's not so much like, here's a map of Atlanta, I need to figure out every single building that is possessed by the God machine or not. It's about evoking a feeling, right? It's about being evocative. It's about bringing forth that sense of crushing paranoia, that sense of the enemy all around you, and bringing that tension, bringing that narrative to the fore for the players to engage with. And if you talk to them in advance, if you sit down with the players and you say to them, here's my big picture goal, I'm going to creep you out and weird you out and show you that goal through tiny details, but I need you to be engaged. And this is horror movie shit, right? This is like, when we watch a horror movie, part of what's fun about it is watching the characters make decisions we would never make, right? Because if everyone in a horror movie acted sane, they acted normal and reasonable, there'd be no horror movies, because we would all just be like, I fucking leave. As soon as things start getting weird, I'm out. Clearly, that's a zombie. Clearly, you worship the devil. I'm out of here, right? That's how, and there'd be no movie. They would just flee to safety, and then that'd be it. But the thing about a role-playing game is that we have dramatic irony over our characters. We get to know things, even as we embody our characters, that they don't know. And part of that is the core premise of the game. The idea of existing as a thorn in the side of our enemies, the idea of resisting from within, right? This same kind of tension can be applied to any sort of game where you are resisting structural power, right? You're a part of it, right? You're in it. And this is the thing. It is the fight against the God Machine, but the God Machine is everywhere. So how do we change it? What do we do? And that premise will get the players looking to their character sheets, looking to the rules, looking for mechanisms to engage and to deal with this premise that you're putting forward instead of running away from it. You want to give them a premise that they can attach to. That's how you do this responsibly. Now, what I think you should do instead of looking at the city and trying to make everything understandable in a very nuanced, detailed way, understand the vibe of Atlanta, right? You said that you were a fan of Atlanta, right? Atlanta isn't just a map of locations, right? Atlanta has a history. Atlanta has a culture. Atlanta has multiple cultures overlapping one another, right? Atlanta is a city made up of a bunch of different kinds of people who have their own personal histories. It's made up of infrastructure for the rich and for the poor. It is a big, complex, nuanced, modern city. And I know that that's daunting, but it has a vibe. And for me, capturing that vibe is what's so much fun about being a GM. You know, like for me, I've been in your position before where I've been like, I really want to set this game in LA, but I don't know enough about LA. I haven't lived there. I'm not from there. I don't know enough to set a game there. But what I can do to help me get past that stuff is say, I'm not setting a game in LA. I'm creating a piece of fiction in a fictionalized version of Los Angeles that I can use in a way that makes sense for my game. So dig into Atlanta's subcultural occult underground. Right? Where do the fucking sorcerers hang out in Atlanta? What is the part of Atlanta's history, geography? What is the shit about Atlanta that clicks with the God Machine, that clicks with your Demon the Descent game? What about the themes of the game match up with the city's history and culture? Find those analogies, and then you can use the city to reinforce thematically the themes of your game, right? Because they're out there. Any big city is going to have its high weirdness, it's going to have its shine, it's going to have its grunge, and you're going to need to understand the city's character more than you need to understand the city's minutia, right? And then because it's a modern city with things like highways, postal services, sanitation systems, whatever, you can use this infrastructural suborning, this poisoning by the God Machine, and you can lay it onto specific stuff, right? Now, I don't know Atlanta well enough to call up examples, but like, for example, if I wanted to show Vancouver as a setting, and in Vancouver, the setting was, let's imagine I'm doing a campaign, it's an urban fantasy campaign about the struggle between nature and the urban environment, right? I can show how close that barrier is by setting like a fairy circle in Stanley Park, which is downtown, surrounded by big skyscrapers and banking and businesses, right? I can show that tension, and that helps reinforce the themes of my game. I can be like, well, the high she council meets in this park, which happens also to be right next to the downtown core, and it's showing that juxtaposition, right? So find what about Atlanta drives your passion and match it up with whatever about Chronicles of Darkness or Demon the Descent, what passion you have there. Find those things and then match them up, right? Find where the tension is, find the passion there for both things and make them overlap. Because your goal here as the game master, in addition to all of the stuff that you need personally to do as a game master of this game, your goal here is to take your creative agenda, the things that you care about, which is to say the city of Atlanta and the game Demon the Descent, and impart to your players what you love about them. You want your players to look at you and say, that was a great session. I want to go to Atlanta. I don't know. Maybe you already live in Atlanta. Maybe your group is playing there, but maybe you want them to be able to attach to that in the same way that you feel it, right? You want to pass along your passion. And I think that you can do it. I think you can do it relatively easily if you understand both things, but you don't need to do detail by detail. And honestly, if you have a player, and I've said this before, right? About think of Atlanta as the Forgotten Realms, right? Think of Atlanta as Tatooine. Think of Atlanta as Goldshire, I guess, if you want to. It's a real place, and you want to do justice to the reality of that place, but it's also a fictional environment, right? Your Atlanta, the Atlanta of your campaign, is already different from actual Atlanta, because I've never been to the ATL, but I'm pretty sure it's not possessed by an all-knowing destructive god machine. But I've never been there. But the thing is, you can think of it the same way you would a licensed property, right? In the same way that when you want to start a campaign of Dungeons and Dragons, you look at the settings and you find one that interests you, right? You pick Forgotten Realms, you pick Dragonlance, you pick Eberron, because there are things about it that excite and interest you, right? You chose Atlanta for a reason, right? And so what about Atlanta do you want to show off? And then this is what I'll do. I'll give you a piece of very practical advice. Open up the Wikipedia for Atlanta, right? Open up a local Atlanta, like a news website, and just start reading. And as you read, make notes, but don't make notes about fact, right? You're not making notes about like where things are. You're not making notes about how many people live in what neighborhoods. What you're doing is you're creating vignettes. So you might write down, if you read Wikipedia and you learn that Atlanta has an average of, 9 months of time that any given new nightclub is open, right? Maybe Atlanta's got big turnover for nightclubs. That little detail, right? You could write down scenes or vignettes that show things about the city, right? So you could have a scene that takes place in a recently closed nightclub. You could have a scene about with an NPC who's trying to get a character who's trying to get a loan to open a new club, even though he knows that in 9 months there is a 75% chance that it is going to close, right? You might want to set a scene in the midst of a very successful nightclub where everybody is going, and finally this is one of those ones that's going to stick around, right? That's a moment of like hope and community, right? So just the tiniest detail about a city, whether it's from the news or a little vignette of detail from Wikipedia, use it as a place to set a scene, use it as a tonal note, right? Think of it as being colored with a certain emotion or feeling, and that can be used to reinforce your themes. What you can do if you're making these notes, make columns, right? And this is if you like doing research paperwork, this is the way you can do this. Make columns. Think about the core tenets and themes of your game, right? If the core themes of your game are paranoia, hope amidst darkness, and decay, if those are your three big things, make those columns, and then go through your research about Atlanta and write down little details in each column that reinforce those themes. What about Atlanta shows hope despite darkness, right? What about Atlanta shows opportunities for paranoia, right? Did Atlanta recently elect a government official that has historical ties to like a surveillance company? Boom, done. Instantaneous note for your game, and that person can be an NPC, their election can be in the background, the characters can start worrying about whether or not they're co-opted by the god machine, right? Because the city is its culture, it's its history, it's people, and all of those details you can pick and choose to reinforce your vision of Atlanta. And this is true whether we're talking about Georgia, or we're talking about Waterdeep, or we're talking about outer space. It doesn't matter. You want to have elements of setting and NPCs that reinforce your themes. So don't think about it in terms of showing off a simulation of a complex setting. Think of it as using the setting as a palette to paint the picture you are so passionate about painting. And that's how you're going to get at the spirit of your version of Atlanta. And I think that when you're, just as a last note, when you're directly inspired by like a literal physical place where people live and could be from, try to do it justice, right? Do the research, treat it like a real place because it is, where people live because they do. Don't make the White Wolf mistake of saying, oh, there's an ethnic cleansing in this country where my game is set. Let's make it about vampires instead, right? There's this real inclination to take real world tragedy. World of Darkness is the worst for this. Take real world tragedy and turn it into a supernatural thing, which robs it of its actuality, right? Don't do that. Don't pull a White Wolf. And not all White Wolf does this, but there are a few real stinkers that White Wolf has done over time. Real world tragedy should not be, and I don't mean just like 9/11 tragedy. I mean like poverty and racism and homophobia. Try not to turn those things into fantasy bullshit, because if we find out that the God Machine was responsible for all the homophobia in Atlanta, it robs it of its reality, right? Because it's people. People are why bad things happen. And so you want to keep a balance. I think that we can show things are made worse by the influence of the villainous supernatural. I'm not saying that stay away completely from this kind of negative influence in the game. I think that's great for reinforcing a theme, but sometimes racists are just racists and they're not possessed by evil spirits. There's this whole other thing about antagonism and real world monsters and stuff. We'll talk about it in another episode. But good luck. It sounds like you're really passionate about your game. And that's cool. That's the best place to start from. Giving a shit. Go figure, right?
Hey Adam, I have a game design question for you. Currently I'm designing a game that focuses on character traits and goals, and while I have a pretty good idea of what I want to reward players for, namely when their traits create complications, working on and accomplishing goals, and when conflict occurs over the what, how, and why of a goal, I'm having trouble creating a reward structure to support this. When I look at other games, players are usually rewarded through character advancement, either gaining new abilities or making their current abilities better. For the game that I am designing, however, character advancement comes less from rewards and more from over the course of play, as traits are gained, lost, or become more or less important to reflect the fiction, and said changes aren't inherently beneficial. I suppose the question I'm asking is, how do you create a reward structure that isn't tied to character advancement? Thank you for any advice you can offer, and have a nice day.
So, as Trey intelligently pointed out, most role-playing games, and honestly, like a lot of just games in general, it's part of the gameplay loop, rely on reward and advancement being linked. So let's talk about what those terms mean, reward and advancement. So let's look at Dungeons and Dragons, because when in Rome. So in Dungeons and Dragons, reward comes in the form of experience points in the game, right? That's the core reward. You get experience points for doing the core challenge of the game, which is to say, mostly fighting monsters, sometimes other stuff, right? So we have the reward that is given to us, right? We have the way we get the reward, and the tools that empower us to achieve our rewards, right? Those tools are the game's systems. So the game gives you your class, it gives you your race, it gives you your abilities at level 1, right? It gives you these things and says, here you go. It is dangerous to go alone. Here are the mechanical accoutrements you will need to engage the reward structure of the game, okay? That's your character. The character is a set of tools for accomplishing things in the game. We're not talking about narrative. I'm talking purely about mechanisms for now. We'll talk about narrative in a second. So here is your thing. Here is your character. This is your Swiss Army knife. It's full of knives. Go out there and accomplish the goal we put before you, which is overcome challenges, fight monsters, right? So you take your character, You go out into the world and you fight monsters and you get experience. And then that experience feeds back into, and I would draw this if I had that experience feeds back into your character, making your character better. Better at what? Doing the thing. You do the thing, you get experience. Experience makes you better. Better at what? Doing the thing. Go do the thing, get experience. That's the loop, right? Gameplay loop. Games give you tools. Tools help you accomplish goals. Goals give you rewards. Rewards improve your tools. Now, Dungeons and Dragons has some secondary fictional economy stuff like gold, which can be used to buy like kind of nothing, maybe magic items if you have enough of it. Magic items are an adjunct, right? So it's a secondary column of reward because we're doing the fight XP level, fight XP level, fight XP level. We're doing that loop. And then on the side, as we fight, we're getting tier 2 rewards, gold and magic items. Those feed back into the loop and we continue to loop out. And that's the game. Most games work this way. Most role-playing games, right? You accomplish the goals, you achieve something, and then you improve. But the counterpoint here is arcade games, right? Now, in an arcade game, most of them anyway, and I'm thinking like early, like 80s, like classic arcade games, you play the game, right? So you put the quarter in, you embody Pac-Man, you have 3 chances to eat as many dots, ghosts, and fruits as you can. You do all of that stuff. When you do it, you're rewarded with points. Those points will never make you a better Pac-Man, right? Sometimes in games, advancement is personal. Sometimes advancement is you physically get better at playing the game. You become knowledgeable and comfortable and you become better as your character improves or separate from your character improving, right? This is why there are no soul, like 0 soul runs of Dark Souls, because those are relying on players getting better, right? Yeah, and some arcade games, that's a great point from chat. Some arcade games getting more points extends your play time, right? So it is fending off a negative response rather than boosting a positive one. So what's interesting here is like, I started thinking about games and I was trying to think about a game that is long form, right? That is long form, not just a one shot with no advancement where the characters just never get better at things. And I wonder about that. Like, do we not design that because it feels fake? Or because it's hard to hook people into a loop with no advancement, with no way to feel like they're getting better. Because I've definitely played games I didn't really like that much. Purely, I'm a experience point addict. I need the rewards. When I play a game, I figure out what I need to do to win at that game, and I do that thing because that's game design, right? Some people play games to just like relax and enjoy and like, you know, play to embody their character and to do a funny voice and to hang out with their friends. And I do all of that too, but I really like advancement. I like winning. I like knowing that I am doing something well. I like looking at my progress and seeing it get better, right? But that's not the only reason. And so it doesn't mean that you can't design a tabletop role-playing game with no advancement. You absolutely can. But most of your role models are going to be games like Fiasco or Microscope or Parlor LARPs or games in which it's easier to do in a one shot because there's no reason to come back, right? And I guess that's the thing about advancement as a mechanism is that it keeps the game fresh. It gives you a goal. And it wants you to come back and keep playing, right? I wonder about a game that is meant to be played long term with no meaningful advancement. What does that loop look like? Because if you look at the loop in Dungeons and Dragons, each completion of the loop, right? Let's call leveling up, fixing the loop. each completion of the loop bumps you up another stair, right? Level 20 is up at the top, level 1 is down at the bottom, and each time you click the loop, you step one more time towards a final goal, right? Ostensibly final goal. It's a very addictive loop. And honestly, it brings people back to the table, right? That feeling of like, yeah, I only need another 100 experience. I can't wait for the next session, right? So it's a powerful part of design. I like advancing. I like feeling like my character is improving as I get to know them. I like having a breadth of skill, and it keeps you coming back, right? Because you're like, wow, I'm level 14 now. I got this new ability. I can't wait to try it out. So without advancement, what we end up with is characters getting, let's talk about what advancement is, right? So we talked a little bit about advancement broadening the character's base. Sometimes advancement is you get more options, and that's fun. That's a fun form of rotation. Sometimes advancement is more certainty, right? If you have a +1 in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and you get a +3 in Powered by the Apocalypse, you are now much more likely to have certainty when you take action, right? When you say, I do this, and the GM says that's a move, roll the dice, your certainty level is much higher with a higher bonus. So what you're gaining is essentially narrative rights. You know, like that, honestly, that's what a high bonus is. It's the ability to say, in any game, it's the ability to say, I get my way, and the dice will back me up. And again, it depends on the system and how that works. I guess the question is, if you give someone a reward, what do they spend that reward on? Right? What do we get for our points? If I do good, if I am a good role player, if I do what your game demands, what benefit do I gain either in certainty or in options or in, I mean, I think even novelty, right? The ability to change things out. But I think it's a mistake to just say, well, I don't care about advancement. It's all fictional advancement. But there's no such thing as a purely fictional role-playing game. That's just telling a story. So what mechanisms in the game trigger the gaining and losing of traits? What triggers a trait becoming more or less important? Is it simply about reflection? Maybe there's no reward structure in your game at all. Like if there's no advancement, maybe you cut rewards and instead have a period of reflection, right? I don't know enough about this game to give you, I think, the advice that you want. I don't know what qualitative and quantitative mechanical elements can be adjusted, but if you're really not interested in advancement, you need to think about how to encourage people to behave certain ways. Because when it comes down to it, that's what advancement is, right? Advancement is a way to, or rewards are a way to nudge players towards behaving in certain ways. It's game design. It's the core loop. So if we don't give people advancement, what are rewards for? And if we don't have rewards, how do we encourage people to play? What in the game is telling me what to do? So it's very, very broad and very, very deep, like way, way more than 15 minutes can answer. Like you're asking questions about game design overall. So what I would say is go back and look at your game and look at where you encourage people to do things, right? Look at what they are rewarded for and how those rewards are spent. Because a reward in and of itself means nothing, right? $100 bill in your pocket in the middle of the desert might as well be worth nothing. If I have 1,000 good RP points and I can't spend them on anything, the game now becomes who can get the most RP points. I guess they're winning, but there's nothing to win. So yeah, advancement gives you either more options or different ways to do the things you're already doing, or makes you more certain when you get to say, my character does this and I don't fail. So that's a form of advancement to me. That's what advancement is in the game. If the characters can never get any better at anything, it makes them more static in the sense that they will always be at the same level of capability, right? So I don't know, think about what things you want to reward instead of advancement, right? If there is a currency in your game, what is that currency spent on? And what benefits do you gain by spending it? Now, these can be mechanical or fictional. If you're doing this right, they're going to be both. A game in which you can change your character through narrative play, earning points. Maybe these are evasion of stasis points, right? Maybe they're change points. But the idea is that advancement exists for a reason, and it's very complicated. What I would say to Trey and to anyone who's interested in this topic, the first place to start, and I've done this a few times, go to your game shelf, whether physical or digital, grab a couple of random PDFs, grab a couple of books, look at what their advancement and reward structures look like, right? Make notes, set them all side by side and look at it. I think most of them you'll find follow the D&D model, right? Some of them will allow you to do different things, but dig in, find a bunch of games, look at how they do it. And remember that reward and advancement are all part of a greater loop. So take a step back and look at that loop in your game and see how it works. It's a great question. And I kind of love it because there is no real answer, right? It's going to depend. Part of designing a game is figuring out what this looks like. So I don't know, maybe you have a game that doesn't have advancement in mind. Maybe you can think of a game off the top of your head that doesn't advance the characters. If you do, leave a comment or post it in chat. Like, let me know, because I'm super curious about it. I think that reward, if I had to pick one thing about role-playing games that was most interesting to me, how do we get the players to behave a certain way? What do we do? How do we reward them for that? So that to me is super interesting. So yeah, find me some, show me some good examples. And while you're there, if you have a question that you want to submit to a future episode of Office Hours, just open a new tab, go to www.adam-koebel.com, click on the Office Hours link, fill out the form, record your voice like these three fine people did today, and share your GMing pain with the world so that we can all work together on talking about it. Thank you to Trey, to Tristan, and to Andy today for their great questions. And thank you, my live studio audience, for hanging out and watching. We will be back next time with 3 more questions from you about tabletop RPGs. Thanks for coming. This has been episode number 87 of Office Hours. I've been Adam Koebel. We'll see you next time.